This is Michael, and in this video we're going to be talking about the business plans themselves, what their structures are, and the two different main types. So, a business plan guides you through each stage of starting and managing your business. There are so many things that go into starting a business that it can be really overwhelming. So, a good business plan is going to take you step by step through everything you need to do to get your business up and running. As a result, you'll use it as a roadmap for how to structure, run, and grow your new business. It will be that guide you can always turn to when your mind says, well, what next? Business plans can also help you get funding or bring on new business partners. If you're looking for someone to help you with your business, particularly financially, they will want to know that you have a plan for success. And a good business plan is something that you can hand them, whether it's a bank or an angel investor or whatever the case may be, to show them not only your idea for the business, but your plans for making that business successful. There is no right or wrong way to do a business plan. Okay, we're going to show you two general outlines for it, but the bottom line is your plan meets your needs. And so long as it does that, it is a good business plan. Now, we're going to start with what is known as the traditional business plan. This has been around for decades. Most banks are used to looking at traditional business plans. Most other investors are used to looking at traditional business plans, and it's a very organized way of thinking about your business. The first part of a traditional business plan, it takes more time to write, it's comprehensive, and this is what is, as I said, commonly requested by lenders and investors. It starts with an executive summary. This is 1 or 2 pages that says your mission statement, in other words, why your business exists, what you have to offer, who are the leaders of your business, and some basic financial information and growth plans. This is there in 1 or 2 pages to summarize everything else that is going to come after that. Oftentimes, as business leaders, we don't have a lot of time to look at things, and so this executive summary, like I said, is 1 or 2 very quick pages someone can look at to determine if they want to spend more time looking at this particular business. So it's really important that this executive summary says what you want it to say, because you want your business plan to go into the I'm still interested pile as opposed to the I'm not interested pile. After the executive summary is a company description. This is a little longer version of what you talked about in your executive summary regarding the business itself. So these are details about the market problems that you plan to solve. Remember, in previous videos we talked about analyzing your market and understanding your market, recognizing that there are things that your business is going to bring to the table that other businesses may not be doing. This will be where you explain the specifics about your customers, demographically, age, education level, expendable income, etc. You'll explain your competitive advantages, the things that your business has going for it that your competitors don't. And this is a place to boast about your strength. This is a time to say, this is what we do well. Remember, you're trying to encourage people to become partners or invest in your business. And why would they want to invest in something that isn't likely going to work? You need to talk about yourself and say, this is what we do well. This is how we're going to meet our goals and take this business to where it needs to be. After the company description, you're going to really get into the market analysis. This is where the numbers and the research that you have put in your market analysis will be demonstrated. This allows you to demonstrate your understanding of the market, who your customers are, who your competitors' customers are, why you think you're going to be more successful than others. This is a place to show that research, show the survey that you sent out to get some of this information, show the study that you referenced, whether it's a governmental study or whatever the case may be. Show the market trends and themes that you are basing your business on, that there's this demand for your product. that this is a growing market segment, etc. And don't just make these statements, but explain causes. Why is this true? It's not just enough to say, we have 50,000 teenagers in this particular marketplace who are interested in something, and our product will fill that. Where did you get that 50,000 number from? Why do you think that they're interested in that product? Why is your product going to fill that need as opposed to other needs? Why would they choose to spend their money on your product versus something else, whether it's a direct competitor making the same thing you do or an indirect competitor that would just be a competitor in the sense of taking their expendable income. After your market analysis, you're going to talk about the organization and management of your company. This is where you outline to the investor, here's how we're actually going to run the company. Who will be making decisions? What is your company's legal structure? If I'm going to invest in a company and it is something other than a corporation, should something happen to that company, my personal assets could be taken in a lawsuit. Whereas if you're a corporation, the company is a separate entity, and if someone sues the company, they can only come after the company's assets, not my personal assets. So understanding C Corps, S Corps, general partnerships, limited liability corporations or LLCs, sole proprietorships, etc. If you're going to be looking for investment, whether it's from a bank where they're not necessarily looking for ownership, they're just looking for payback on a loan, or whether you're looking for partners, people who not only will invest some money but will want an ownership of your corporation, they're going to want to know what their liability is and what the company's legal structure is. In this part of the business plan, talking about organization management, you can include an organizational chart, who reports to who, re-emphasizing how those decisions are made. And it's always a good idea to include your leaders' resumes. It's not just enough to say, well, Bob's the president of the company and he'll be making all the decisions. Well, why did we put Bob as the president of the company? What makes Bob qualified to make those decisions? Sally's the CEO. While she won't be making day-to-day decisions, she'll be overseeing the overall strength of the company. Well, what qualifies Sally for that role, etc. That's why including those leaders' resumes is really important in this part of the business plan. You're next going to talk about what you're going to sell, the services or products that you're going to sell. How will it benefit the customers? What is that product's life cycle? In other words, when should we expect to see customers coming back, wanting to buy more of our products? Here, if you are doing something technical, is where you will list any intellectual property you may have. These may be trademarks, patents, etc., or any other research and development that you're doing. You're going to want to do that in some detail. Now, you may also want to include somewhere in this business plan some sort of a non-disclosure agreement, where if you're showing these people this business plan, some sort of a contract that they'll have to sign that says they won't share this information with anybody else or use it for their own personal gain. You wouldn't want someone stealing your idea, stealing your business before it even gets off the ground, simply because you were looking for help. So that is also something else that can be included in this part of the traditional business plan. You're going to want to include something about marketing and sales. It's not just enough to have a great product. The market needs to know about that product. So describe in detail, once again, how you will attract and retain customers. How will you get those 50,000 teenagers to know about your product? How will you continue to make those people happy after they've bought their product? Because let's be honest, things go wrong. You could be making the best product in the world, have the best service in the world. That does not mean that you won't have unhappy customers. So how will you deal with those unhappy customers? How will you keep your happy customers happy? And then describe actually how a sale happens. Do you quote the work before you actually do the work? Do you charge to get a quoted or do you put in a service that you would need to charge for before you can offer a quote? Quotes are almost always free, but sometimes you may have to do some research, especially if you're a service, some research into the organization on how you could help them. Are you going to charge for that research? Does that research then belong to the customer? Will this sale of a product or service happen online or happen in a store? How will you deliver that product or service? So really get into details from the very start of a sale to the completion of a sale, what's going to happen and how you're going to let the market know about your service or product. Here is where you may also want to include a funding request. This is optional. Your business plan does not have to ask people for money. It could just be an outline of how you're going to run the business. But let's be frank, quite often a business plan is put together and organized not just to give me a blueprint for where I need to go in running my business, but as a way of gathering revenue, of gaining new funds. So if we're going to include a funding request in this traditional business plan, we need to outline specifically how much money we're going to need and for how long we are going to need it. As a general rule, these traditional plans have funding requests for 5 years. So the goal is to explain how much funding you're going to need over the next 5 years and specifically what you are going to use it for. It doesn't do an investor any good for you to say, well, I need $1 million. Well, $1 million for what? Are you going to go vacation in the Grand Cayman Islands for the next 5 years with that $1 million and now I'm not getting anything back on my investment? By telling the investor what you're going to spend the money on gives them more confidence in you as an investment. So if you're going to ask for a certain amount of money, you want to outline specifically what you're going to use that money for and when you will need that money. Because what will likely happen, or what potentially could happen, especially if you're bringing in a partner, is if you give them a 5-year plan and you need $500,000 or $400,000, let's say $400,000 your first year, and then for the next 4 years you need the rest of the money on a pretty equal basis to get you to the $1 million, well, then you can say, or they may say, look, I'll loan you the $400,000 for the first year, and provided you've met all the goals for that first year, then the subsequent $175,000 or whatever the case may be will be allocated every year after that, or $150,000, I guess, if I do the math in my head real quick. So by outlining a specific plan, you may be able to secure larger amounts of money because in that plan you can set benchmarks for yourself and for the investor so that they have increased more and more confidence in your ability to run the business and thus increased confidence in investing. Specify the kind of money you are looking for. Is this going to be debt, i.e. a loan, meaning you're going to not only pay back the money that was lent to you plus some interest, or is it going to be equity? Basically, it's a gift of cash in exchange for partial ownership of the business. Now, it's important to remember that if you're going to be asking for equity, so you don't have to pay this loan back, you shouldn't be asking for more from the investor than the business is going to be worth in that time period. So, for example, if I am going to ask for $1 million in equity, I'm going to ask for my partner to come in, they're going to put $1 million of their cash into my business for a partial ownership of the business. If that business will never be worth more than $500,000, why as an investor would I give you $1 million for that $500,000 value? It doesn't make sense. Now, Granted, the same may be true of this loan, but in a loan, even though my business may never be worth $1 million, I may have $1 million in revenue that I've been able to use to pay back that loan. As you're asking for that money, specify the terms you would like applied. In other words, what is the interest rate if we're asking for a loan? If we're asking for equity, how long do they get this ownership? What are the buyout terms, etc.? So maybe you get a partial ownership in exchange for your investment for 5 years, but then I want to be able to buy you out. What will the terms of that buyout be? Make sure you specify that in advance. Because if you are more successful than you had planned to be, if you don't specify those terms up front, it may cost you a lot to buy out that owner on the back end. Give them a detailed description of how you're going to use that investment. You're going to buy material. You're going to pay salaries until revenue increases. You're going to cover specific bills until revenue increases. Basically, they're wanting to know that this just isn't an allowance, right? It's not just a gift of cash that you're going to use and, gosh, I sure hope I can pay you back. They're going to be looking at this as an investment. And the difference between an investment and an expenditure or a gift is that in an investment, I'm not only expecting to get my money back, but I'm expecting to get more than my money back, right? I'm expecting a return. So always include a description of your future financial plans, how you're going to pay off your debt, when or if you might sell your business, etc. This will once again make someone confident enough potentially to invest in your business. Your traditional business plan should at the end include financial projections. Whether or not you are asking for money, you should always have some financial projections. Financial projections will, once again, keep you focused on your business, but for an investor, it will also show that your business is stable and will be successful. So, if you're doing your business plan after your business has been running a while, it's important to look back and show the history of how you've been successful so far. This will include income sheets, balance sheets, cash flow statements, etc. Any other collateral you may have. Collateral is a fancy word for things you own that you could sell if you needed to get cash. In other words, these are things that have value to the rest of the marketplace. And then you also want to look forward. What is your prospective financial outlook over the next 5 years? So forecast some income statements. In other words, imagine what sales are going to be like, but make it realistic. Show some balance sheets. Show some cash flow statements. There is a difference between an income statement and a cash flow statement. An income statement talks about income from an accounting standpoint, and you can talk to Mary in your accounting classes about the difference between income statements and cash flow statements. And then finally, also show some capital expenditure budgets. In other words, how are you going to spend the money that you bring in? It's always important to remember when talking about budgets. Budgets are not promissory notes. In other words, you don't have to spend exactly what you lay out in a budget. They are roadmaps, they are plans. So I plan to spend this much a month in rent. I plan to spend this much a month in salaries. As situations change, maybe revenue increases, maybe revenue decreases, you may have to adjust from that budget. You may have to spend more or spend less in a particular area, or maybe spend more or less overall. The point is to have a plan based on what you think is the reality of things going forward. So your capital expenditure budgets, the things you're going to invest in versus your regular expenditures, which are recurring expenses, those need to balance out based on what your income statements are going to be. And you need to keep your cash flow in mind as well. It's really critical that you're very specific in first year data. You need at least a quarterly breakdown of everything that we've just talked about, if not a monthly breakdown. In years 2, 3, 4, and 5, because they're further away, we have less vision into what those realities might be, so we don't have to be as detail oriented. But in that first year, you should have a very clear, very specific plan for what your finances are going to be. Be prepared to explain how you arrived at your numbers. In other words, if you're going to say, I'm going to have $1,000 in sales in my first year, well, why do you think you're going to have $100,000 in sales? Just because you think that sounds like a good number? You should be able to point to some other information that backs your arrival at that $100,000 number. For example, you might say, this current market has a potential demand of $1 million for this type of product. And while there are some other businesses already in this market space, there does not seem to be anyone who has command of that market space. We have looked at the success of these other companies that have already been there, and they sold $200,000 in their first year. We recognize that they're already in the space, that we're new, so we're going to have to take some business from people, but also potentially tap these other people who we think should be in the marketplace but aren't currently buying anything. So we're going to be conservative and say we're maybe not going to do quite as well as they did in their first year of $200,000 in sales, but we think we can do at least half of that given these situations, right? That is how you explain arriving at a certain number. And then, because you have arrived at certain income statements and expenditures, make sure those things match. And don't hesitate to use charts and graphs. Those are really great ways to very quickly show someone the details of some numbers so that they understand what's going on, rather than having to dig through numbers, which for some people, especially visual people, may not always be the easiest things to understand. But if I show you a pie chart where half the pie is one color, that really draws my attention to, well, what is half that pie showing me? Or a bar chart where I can see one bar is a lot taller than another or longer than another. Well, why might that be? Charts and graphs are a really great way, especially when comparing numbers, to show what you mean. So you'll end your traditional business plan with an appendix. These are other pieces of information that the user will find helpful, but may or may not necessarily be something you want them to have to deal with as they're just reading through it. So for example, your business needs a license to sell food, for example. It's important that your investors or your partners see that you have that license, but they don't need to see it when you're talking about the fact that you need licensure to sell food. You can just say that's in the appendix. Same way as is true of any patents, legal documents, other contracts you may be involved in, resumes, etc. Just put all of that extra stuff that the investor might want to see, but isn't really part of the story. You can put all that in the appendix. That's a traditional business plan. Let's talk about a lean startup plan. Especially for smaller companies or people who don't have as much experience in running their own business, this might be a great way to get going, because it takes everything we talk about in the traditional business plan, but simplifies it some. The lean startup formats are charts used to only show certain things that describe the company's value proposition, infrastructure, customers, and finances. In other words, we're going to give you all the same information in the traditional startup plan, but just in a simplified form and in a much more visual form. So if you're wanting to do this quickly, you don't have time to do lots of really in-depth research and detailed research into your customers, your marketplace, etc. But you do still have some data and logical ideas to back up what you're saying. A lean startup plan might be the way to go, because they're useful for visualizing trade-offs and fundamental facts about your company, because it is so graphic, as opposed to word and number oriented like a traditional business plan is. It can really be a good foot in the door for a certain type of investor. So the first thing in a lean startup plan are key partnerships. Who are the other people you're going to work with to run your business? Who are your suppliers? Who are manufacturers if you're having something built but you don't have the machinery to build it? Who's building it for you? And any subcontractors you may be working with. Before I came to the university to teach, I was working with a company that we were commonly a subcontractor for these other businesses. And so if they were putting together a startup plan, they would list us as a subcontractor who would do that particular kind of work. Subcontractors can be useful because unlike employees that you will want to pay on a regular basis, weekly, monthly, etc., subcontractors you only pay when you use them. So if business slows down, you just don't hire those subcontractors because you don't have any work. Whereas employees, a good employer will continue to pay them even though the work may not be there. You're going to list your key activities. What are the ways you are going to have a competitive advantage? Are you going to be selling directly to customers? Are you going to be using technology to tap into customer bases that the current environment isn't tapping into? You think of companies like Amazon, and Amazon started out as a book selling company. Well, prior to Amazon, if you wanted a book, you went to the local bookstore. And then companies like Amazon took that and put it online and said, look, we can sell books anywhere in the world. You don't have to go to a bookstore. Is it nice to pick up a book and look through it and maybe read a chapter before you decide to buy it? Yes. But let's be honest, not everyone buys a book that way. And so all we have to do is list the books that we have and ship them out. This is an example of how you can use technology to change how your business works. You can also use the sharing economy. These are things like Uber and Airbnb, where I have this resource that I don't use all the time. Can I use technology to put together someone who has the resource with someone who wants to use the resource? And that's the concept behind Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and all of these other sharing economy businesses. So what is the way your business is going to be different in the marketplace, and how will you change the marketplace? That's in the key activities. You're going to have key resources. What tools do you have at your disposal to make your business successful? So who's on your staff and what special skills and tools do they bring to the table? What sorts of capital or money do you have at your disposal? Do you have any intellectual property at your disposal? Intellectual property are things like patents and trademarks and technology that is just yours that no one else has. As you're listing your key sources, don't forget to leverage any business resources that might be available to special groups. So if you are a person of color, if you are a person who's had experience in the military, there are certain grants, there are certain financial rules, certain financial resources that you can use to your advantage because they are only available to people who are of color or who have served in the military or whatever the case may be. So make sure that you're working hard to get that kind of money, whether it comes with a favorable interest rate or perhaps it's just a grant, meaning it's free money. Make sure you've done your research so that you can list those things in your key resources. Have a value proposition. What is the clear, compelling statement about why your company is going to be successful in the marketplace? When we're talking about the concept of value, it's the concept of, if we're going to enter into some sort of a relationship, I'm going to put a certain investment into that relationship. Now, in the business world, we often talk about that investment as money, right? I'm going to give you money for a product, or I'm going to give you money for a service. In the personal realm, that investment might be time or emotional well-being. But whatever my investment is, I expect to get at least that much, if not more, out of it. So when I buy a car, I expect to get more out of that car than the $20,000 I spent on the car. I expect, yes, to have transportation, which is basically most of the time why we buy cars, but there's also an element of freedom, right? I can go anywhere I want, whenever I want, because I don't have to wait on a bus or I don't have to wait on a train. I have my own car. I should be able to potentially make my life better. because now I have a car that can get me to work, and maybe there's a better job that's farther away from where I live that would be hard to walk or bicycle to. So by having a car, I can get to that job. So when we're talking about value, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about that improvement upon investment that someone is going to be making. So if you're a business coming into this market space and you're selling a product or you're selling a service, yes, people are buying your product or service, but let's be honest, they're not just buying that product or service for whatever the material cost of that product or service is. They're expecting to get something more out of it. Maybe it's a feeling of pleasure. Maybe they're expecting to get out of it the ability to impress their coworkers, or it's not just about the thing you're selling, it's the entire value proposition. So be able to think about really what your company is different and what value you are bringing to the table above and beyond the product or service you're selling. You're also going to talk about your customer relationships. How will customers interact with your business? Is this going to simply be a website that they go find the product, enter a payment, and get the product in the mail? That's a very kind of automated, impersonal way of doing it, which is going to require that you're probably going to want to be the lowest price, or that you're going to be the hardest, you're going to offer products that are hard to find. Or is your relationship with your customer going to be more based on personal interaction? That feeling of value that you're getting above and beyond the product or service being sold. These are really important things to think about in businesses, because you can have two businesses that sell exactly the same thing, and maybe one sells that thing for really cheap, but maybe doesn't have the best customer service, and the other one sells it for more money but has great customer service, and both of them will have customers because they're bringing a different value to the market. The one is bringing the value of fewest resources needed to get the thing, and that I'm just getting value out of the thing itself. And the other one is saying, look, you're going to invest a little more, but you're going to get more value than just the thing that you bought. You're going to get a personal experience. You're going to have someone to ask questions of. You're going to have someone to say thank you for buying the product. It's amazing how far a thank you can go. And because we're talking about the customer relationship, it's really important to describe that customer experience from start to finish. Remember, in the traditional plan, we talked about the sales process from start to finish, really focusing on the sale. Here in the lean plan, we're talking about a customer experience. So if you have a store, let's say, maybe we're going to talk about the atmosphere of the store, that they come into the store and they smell jasmine, which relaxes them, and there's classical music playing, which relaxes them, or there's hip-hop playing, which excites them and gets them energized and happy. Whatever that may be, you're going to want to describe the customer experience during your whole relationship with that customer, including potentially after the sale. Do you send follow-up notes? How does the customer experience your business? And we also want to segmentize our customer. We want to talk about who our customer is and be very specific about that. What are the demographics of that customer? What is their income level? Where do they live, etc.? Because once again, an investor is going to want to know who they serve. And it's really important for a business, just as it is for a person, to understand who they are. And part of how we define who we are in a business is who our customers are. And if you try and change who you are because you want to get a new customer base, well, let me back that up. If you try and get a new customer base, you may have to change who you are. And maybe you're not good at that. Maybe you chose that initial customer base because it fits to your strengths. Keep that in mind as you're thinking about your customer segments. So be very specific about who your target market is. Finally, let's talk about the channels. How will you communicate with your customers? How are you going to market to your customers? How are you going to serve your customers after the fact? Will it be through radio ads, TV ads, online ads? email, word of mouth, farmers markets. How are you going to find customers? How are you going to tell them about your product? How are you going to service them after you've sold them the product, etc.? Those channels of how you communicate will in part either drive or be driven by who your customer is. If you want to attract senior citizens, you're probably not going to advertise on Twitter. If you want to attract young people, you're probably not going to advertise in newspapers. Right? So thinking about how you're going to communicate with your customers is critical. And always be thinking about it from the customer standpoint. Just because you like Twitter doesn't mean your customers like Twitter. Just because you like Instagram doesn't mean your customers like and use Instagram. So keep those things in mind. A lean startup plan is going to have a cost structure. What are the things that I'm going to need to spend money on? And how do those costs relate to the value the customer is going to receive? By focusing and keeping your eye on how expenditures relate to the customer, you're by nature connecting those two things, and by keeping the focus on the customer, increasing the likelihood of the success of your business. Because the customer is what drives it. Doesn't matter how good your product is, it doesn't matter how good your service is. If you can't convince the customers that it's good, it doesn't really matter. So by making sure that all of your costs somehow are investments in your customer, this will ensure that those costs are well placed. This cost structure should be listed from the most significant, i.e. the greatest costs to your business at the top, to the least significant or least important cost to your business is at the bottom. And then in your strategy, define how those costs are related to the customer and how you are going to continue to pursue that investment in the customer. Once we've talked about costs, let's talk about revenue, the money we're going to bring in. Are we going to bring in money from sales? Are we going to bring in money from membership fees? Are we going to sell advertising space in our website? There's all sorts of ways your company can bring in revenue. You need to be very specific about how you're going to do that. And if you are using multiple revenue streams, we're doing direct sales, we're doing membership fees, we're doing advertising space sales, we're doing GoFundMe campaigns, right? List all of them and list them in order of importance to your organization. So if most of our money is going to be coming from membership fees, that's what we want to list at the top. If most of our money is going to be coming from direct sales, that's what we want to list at the top. And don't just list the types of revenue streams you're going to have. Do a prediction. What are those revenue streams going to come to? $100,000, $50,000, whatever the case may be. So that's the basics of startup plans. There are a couple startup plans listed in Canvas that I encourage you to open up and look at and compare how those two businesses are described. They can be your models for the startup plans or the business plans that you're going to create. So now you should be able to start working in your group, start creating business plans, and digging into the things that you're going to need to do to make your business successful. Thanks a lot. We'll see you in the next video.